Spiritual, mental prison is real. It's so real, you can't separate the difference between physical and spiritual. And when I say spiritual imprisonment, it means that most people are walking imprisoned in their mind. Quite often, they don't think to connect the dots between spiritual and physical, and that's what I really mean. And me growing up, speaking to a lot of OGs, a lot of old heads, who actually been to physical prison. For most of y'all that don't know me, in my 20s, a couple decades ago, I was also a bail bondsman in the state of New Jersey. I was licensed, and I was also, they call it a bounty hunter. I really was. And having said that, I grew up around, it was culture, like whether somebody just got locked up or they're about to go to prison. Even before I was a bail bondsman, it was like normal. It was like, hey, uncle, where you been at? Yo, what's up, Unc? They say Unc these days, right? No, we said Unc back then, And when somebody got locked up, they didn't get surprised. Well, I didn't. I would just be like, oh, shit, how long? How long you been in there? When did you get out? That was it. So I needed to know. It was part of my everyday living. And so speaking to a lot of OGs, and especially when I was young, and I was like a really big sponge, you know what I'm saying? I absorbed, man, and I mean, like, you can't even avoid those conversations. They were in school. They were students, bro. I went to one of those. I went to one of those high schools. Even elementary school was crazy back then. School 15, I seen like kids punch like teachers right in the face. I mean, like a boy to a female. I seen females like box boys and beat them up, or vice versa. Like, you couldn't even separate girls and boys. It was like everybody was on. All you had to do was look at somebody wrong. And like, I remember, what was that saying? Let me see. Don't laugh at me. Like, why you up in my grill? I don't think they say that now, do they? Like, my grill, why you up on why you all in my face? You know what I'm saying? And like, man, in grammar school, I'm not gonna lie, man, most of them were females, man. Sometimes I just be like in the ethers, right? And if by accident I'm looking at somebody that didn't know me too well, shoot, best believe I better look away. I wasn't gonna do no kung fu on no girl. I was so scared of girls. I still am. This is numeracy. This is spiritual talk, but I've been in prison, mental prison, 24 years, And again, when I say 24 years, it's an inside time that was within, or encoded within my DNA, of when I entered and how I exited. And all of the revelation just made it clear to me today on September 9, 2025. And I didn't know today was 999. It's just that when things started to become clear and I went online, I just realized that. And once I made that realization with numeracy, because there's language in that, I opened up to be more of a receiver even more, When your mind is in prison, man, you know what I'm saying? Your entire somatic nervous system gets locked up. And so that it functions everyday life, depending what hat you're wearing, what mask you're wearing, right? What character you're playing. Right, be in character, right? Got to be in character. I'm a Sifu and Kung Fu, right? It's all characters, man. Some are positive, some are negative. But once you imprison in a prism, the same, right? The illusions, the masks, building up character, and still being in prison while these character masks are being cracked open, and it's torture. Calling it an awakening process makes it sound like you're putting butter on a piece of toast. I'm not taking away from that, but it's just how I can't even put words behind it, man. So your entire nervous system doesn't know the difference between spiritual bondage or physical bondage or emotional bondage. It will enact your wish is my command. So when you're doing things or you're not doing things, oftentimes, the good news is when you have physical trauma, and now I'm putting on another hat for educational purposes, right? As an acupuncturist over the years, I can speak for that strongly the same. That a lot of the times that people who have like chronic illnesses, It's a way to kind of like impede on the person. And I don't want to say force them because it's like you to you, but to get you to be placed in a pause, to pay attention. And I can say 90% of trauma, as far as like I'm talking about symptomology is concerned. And as an acupuncturist, we're tree huggers. I was tree hugging in prison. It's physical, emotional, or mental pain is the same to an acupuncturist. And once you become more aware, that's when you start digging into more rabbit holes. That's when you start looking for your pastor, your minister. That's when you start attempting to find yourself. Oftentimes, that's when you catapult your journey. But when you start doing that, that actually expands more of what you're looking to come out of, like escape the matrix, right? I hate to say it, but that's like an agenda to try to get you to escape something. Because when you escape, it means you're working still within fear, and then the escape of fear or the release of fear, right? As if everything happened by accident. And the problem with me is the last 5 years or so, I want to say before 2020, but 2020 made things and amplified things. It was like I was aware in how I was implanted into the karmic prison, and I got lost in it so many times. And I would find myself, even as a teenager in my 20s, and it got heavier in my 30s, right? And then whatnot. And once you're in, you have to complete that timeline in a sense, or at least that was my kind of like, that was my journey in the way I can explain it. And it will sound silly speaking about it. It's not limited to just what I'm saying. It's not black and white, you know what I mean? But there's something about having to honor timeline here, right? Even though you can say timelines are an illusion, it's a measurement of the scientific experience or experiment. And you know, you have to honor that you're going to live and die in this physical vessel, and then you can argue, then you could go deeper, right? If you're a scientist, you know that you're living and dying all the time. You don't even need to be a spiritual tree hugger to know that. Just going into the metamorphosis of how cells on a daily basis, you know, it's just there's no way you can't the maturity of any cell, depending on where it's at, whether it's your blood or your liver or a kidney, right? Your eyeballs. Each cell has a time capacity, but the evolution of the cell is also the dismantling of that. And you can also argue that each organ in your body is in some time of a time encapsulated imprisonment, right? Because like the vortex of the energy pattern that holds your liver per se, right, in flesh form, has its own entity value. It's actually proven, right? It has its own frequency. It has its own entire form and how it works within its evolution and its process. And you would actually have to think like a liver, be your own liver, and meditate with it so that you can change perspectives, right? Same thing with your kidneys. The moral of my message is that I felt like honoring my timeline was the warm-up to life. And it came to me today, kind of, right? That your mind is the warm-up. You don't need a warm-up. You create the warm-up. And for me, physical, emotional, and spiritual has never been differentiated. I didn't know how to, which is how I attracted such an eloquent style of Kung Fu called Xing Yi Chuan. And with that, you actually train in that. So while I was in mental prison, this is how I started to understand my Kung Fu through complete failure by never having, let's say, enough, whether it's physical resources or emotional resources, right? Or the love that I needed, right? You can say the same for almost everyone, right? But for me, because I was a highly refined, sensitive being, you know, I couldn't show that I was sensitive that way because it gets boxed in as to, oh, he's sensitive. No, it's that I hear everything. I can hear like what you're thinking in your mind. And I've had that, and I would have to sometimes put that aside for a long time, right? By putting on masks with humor. For me, it was humor. I would change the conversation. I would actually mind manipulate you and me in the circumstance with humor, right? Because I would start to see too much because I was in mental prison. I graduated from mental prison today, so that's why I feel relaxed. It's all good in the hood. And the purpose of this message is to hopefully I can motivate somebody who gets it. You know, what I got out of mental prison with my eyes wide open, with the fear and all that, complete uncertainty, was that I was stripped from everything. I had nothing. And this last year, everything collapsed on me. And I mean physically everything. And usually I'm okay with that because I grew up poor, having nothing. Like if I wanted a car, I had to get a car. If I wanted back then it was a VCR. Before, I didn't have cable. If I wanted a VCR, I got a job. You know, eventually when I was old enough, because this is what I wanted. I wanted to watch movies, right? So I didn't have a telephone until I was old enough to be able to afford a telephone, right? And because my mom's was in a mental prison, you know, and you can argue that I came here to enlighten the family tree from both sides of the family as an example, and it doesn't have to necessarily relate to the family that's alive right now. I mean the entire family line, right? Because we all eloquently create this for me to exist. So it's thanks to every single one of y'all as an example, you know, I'm allowed to exist in this particular time and in this vessel to experience what I'm about to share, I guess. To know source within. You know what I mean by source? You have to get stripped from everything sometimes, especially if you're in mental prison, especially if you need to be trained from it because you found it challenging to do it, or it's not as, or that it's so challenging if you're not, right? Because if you're not tested, if you're not encapsulated to just you and yourself, hence mental prison, it's just you. Nobody can see you, nobody can help you. You could be living, and this was me, right? This was me to me. Living with somebody my entire life, right? Since I was a little baby, my mom's, right, got married, right? And I've always, even after that, right, I was always with someone, and yet I always felt alone and misunderstood. And then when I finally ended up being alone, because everything collapsed on me, finances, every single thing. I had it going on, right? I had an acupuncture practice, and just things started to collapse, right? It was like the illusion was collapsing. And that's when I started to say, wow, I thought I was already graduated from this mental prison. No. I had checked out for a while. That's what it was. And as that collapsed, I was left with just myself. An entire different country, too. And having said that, when I wanted to, and this is how simple it got, this was like my last test. When I wanted to work out, take care of myself, I didn't like how I was like disappearing, right? I started to become a fruit eater mostly. And I'm grateful to that, by the way. And it started to mess with my head because you're trained to believe that you get your protein only through meat and only through legumes and all of that. And it's hard to like break that, but that's another topic. So having said that, because I believe the same thing too somehow, right? Because it wouldn't have made sense any other way. I saw myself shrinking, you know, and I started to see myself like physically age, and you know, and it starts in your mind before it physically starts happening, and that I know. So this video is a tribute to me. Had just starting out working out just a couple weeks ago, having only been able to do half a pull-up, and not even one full body dip. And in a matter of weeks, I'm able to start to regain who I am with nothing, no gym, no weights, right? Started picking up rocks. And when everything got stripped from me, I realized that that's how you start to understand source when you are in mental prison, when you're ready to come out, when it's time, when you have everything stripped from you and what you got in front of you, you make not only the best of it, you maximize it. You see what you want to achieve with your mind, whether it's a certain physique, whether it's a certain state of presence of mind. And with what you have in front of you, it's been articulated divinely so. Because it's you. You're the warm-up. It's your mind over the matter. But to understand that, I needed to experience matter over mind. So just with calisthenics, Xingyi, Qigong, Kung Fu, all of it's my body. All of it's my natural weight. What naturally grows on the earth, which is what's there, which is supposed to be free, like grapes. There's a video on that. Not with me, famous person. And fruits and vegetables, all of that's supposed to be free. That's natural. That's what God gives for all of us. That shouldn't be sold. When I was left with the bare minimal, which is just with me, my own body, I made the best of what I had. And this time around, after 24 years in the pen, bruh. Yo, serious, man. And I got a strong mind. Those walls were strong. You can't see them, right? So it makes it like virtually impossible. But I'm here to say you don't need to warm up. Because a lot of times, because I required a warm up before I did my Kung Fu, or I was about to do push-ups, and I was like, man, I didn't warm up. And I would shut down and just like skip a day or 2 or 3. Then I realized that my mind is the warm-up. See, I was sent to prison, which was actually a prison, which was actually a school of mirrors of my mind, an optical illusion made real from my mind the same. The illusion can't change until the mind changes the optics by projecting different. So the next time you want to go do a dip, you want to do a push-up, or you want to practice an old dance routine, be the warm-up. Just get into it. See, when you're in prison, or at least mental prison, you work with what you have. And if you have nothing, and you have very little time in your hands, let's say, just get on it. Do it. Just say, I don't need a warm-up. I am the warm-up. And just get in there and let that exercise, or whatever that is that you want to change, be the warm-up.